Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by Speedstream. I'm Jim Cardle. Lamar Smith is a former Bexar County Commissioner and now Congressman in Texas Congressional District 21. He's the former chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, currently sits on the Homeland Security Committee and the Judiciary Committee, and is chairman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. We're glad to be able to visit today with Congressman Lamar Smith. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Jim, always good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
You've got a well-established career there, makes the introduction difficult. But
you got it all in there.
Appreciate you coming in, and a couple things, and there's plenty to cover today with you. First of all, I think on constituents' minds and viewers' minds might be the debt ceiling limit. You were recently quoted as saying that the American families have to balance their checkbook, the federal government should have to balance theirs. The debt ceiling was increased in the Republican House and the Democrat Senate. Give us an update of what happened there.
I couldn't feel more strongly about this issue, Jim. I voted against increasing the debt limit because it was basically a blank check. In the past, we've always tied increasing the debt limit to equivalent or greater cuts in spending. We didn't do that this time, and so I just could not vote for it. It was supported by and approved by an overwhelming number of Democrats, and I think just a couple of dozen Republicans. So the Democrats have that on their resume right now. The reason I feel so strongly about not just giving a blank check to the government is because their spending is out of control. The federal government now has to borrow 25 cents on every dollar it spends. No family can do it, as you just mentioned. No community, no business, no government should do it. That's the road to insolvency, road to bankruptcy. And the deficit is the amount that we spend beyond our means. It's how much we spend beyond the revenues that we take in. And the deficit has increased 50% over the last 4 to 5 years. And we just can't go down that path. Someone's got to say enough, draw a line in the sand, and say we're not going to do it anymore. So we're going to look for opportunities to do that. I also believe in a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, because if we don't have an amendment to the Constitution, Congress is not going to do what it should. So we need to give some oomph to that. It so happens the last time we had a balanced budget in this country, I was on the Budget Committee. In those days, you could serve 6 years, and while I was on the committee, we passed a balanced budget, and we eventually persuaded the president to sign it. The time before that we had a balanced budget in this country was during the Eisenhower administration. Somehow we ought to get our economic house in order more than once a generation and balance the budget. So anything I can do to balance the budget, I'm in favor of, and if it's to vote against increasing the debt, I'm in favor of doing that too.
You mentioned the amount of borrowing, 25%. And it was also in the news this week that it's the 5-year anniversary of the quote-unquote stimulus bill encouraged by the Obama administration now 5 years ago. Talk about, is there discussion amongst your fellow congressmen linked to the spending on the stimulus? Has that proven to be a worthwhile expenditure? It's contributed to the debt. What are your thoughts on the anniversary there?
I voted against the stimulus plan. That was almost $1 trillion, $900 billion when it was considered. And I was glad I voted against it. Everything that we thought was going to be true was true. It didn't create near the number of jobs that we were told it was going to be creating. Remember, the president said, we're going to create ready-made, shovel-ready jobs, is what he said. Well, when it turned out after a couple of years that each job created was costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, it would have been easier just to have paid people rather than to spend money in an ineffective, inefficient way. And so now we added to the deficit by almost $1 trillion with that stimulus package that I voted against. But that was another reason to vote against the debt limit. It so happens that the vote to raise the debt limit was about the same amount as that stimulus plan. So my feeling is, let the people who voted for the stimulus vote to raise the debt limit. And in fact, that's the way it turned out. Republicans voted against stimulus. Democrats voted in favor, and they're the ones who voted in favor of the debt limit. At some point, the American people are going to get tired of this spending and taxing and spending and taxing and living beyond our means, and maybe that's what the next election is all about.
A novel idea there, a little common sense you're talking about would be of note. And if I can change subjects then, because you're talking about the government expenditures, one area that you oversee as chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee is the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Been in the news a little bit lately because of, not because of the Keystone Pipeline, but they've got purview there. You recently introduced a quote-unquote Secret Science Act.
Yes.
And when you were in last time, talked about how you had had to issue subpoenas. Give us an update on your efforts there and what is the EPA doing?
Okay. I was the first chairman of the Science Committee to issue a subpoena in almost 21 years. And the reason I felt so strongly about it, and in fact took that unusual action, was because the EPA refused to cooperate with the committee. We had this administration actually testify before the committee that the data that they base these regulations on, the regulations cost tens of billions of dollars, a couple of regulations cost $100 billion, that the data they use should be made public. They testified, the administration testified, the President's Science Advisor testified that yes, the data should be made public, the American people should see it, it should be peer reviewed, it should be tested by scientists to find out if it's accurate. Even though they testified the American people should be able to get their hands on this data, they never gave it to us. And so for 6 months we traded letters, they stonewalled, and they didn't give it to us, and we basically said, that's enough. We're going to issue the subpoena. Now they're giving us a little bit of the information, but they're still not giving us what we need or what we should have. And so last week I introduced a bill, the Secret Science Reform Act, that basically says the EPA cannot issue any regulation whatsoever unless they've made the data public. We did find out recently that some of the data they were using to justify some of these other regulations, particularly the clean water and clean air, and we need clean water and clean air, but we need it to be rational, and we need it to not be overly burdensome, and we need it to not be arbitrary. And we found out some of the data they were using was 30 years old. It was out of date, and they were using that data to justify the American people and business owners and taxpayers paying tens of billions of dollars. And we just said we've had enough of it. So they've gotten the message. This is a signal. We're going to mark it up on our committee. We're going to pass it on the House floor, and maybe they'll start thinking twice before using data that's either out of date or doesn't justify what they say it does justify.
Well, speaking of just fine, let me put you on the spot a bit. You're chairman of the committee with oversight over EPA.
Yeah.
The administration's been promising. Have you seen regulations that are actually based on public, peer-reviewed review, or is it totally a case where they're issuing these regulations in secret? I know you can't be definitive saying each and every one, but
good question.
To what degree?
To the degree that I've seen, all the regulations have been based upon data that they have been unwilling to make public and have tested by independent scientists. So it really makes you suspicious, Jim, as to whether these regulations can be justified, or is it just more government control by the administration to, frankly, take control of our lives. And we're just not going to let them do it without a fight.
Well, good luck with that fight. Folks, thanks for joining us again for another edition of Texas Insider TV with Congressman Lamar Smith, Chairman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Congressman, let me jump into another area that you've been at the point of the spear on, and that's investigating the security of private information on the new ObamaCare HealthCare.gov website. A hugely sensitive area now with the Target stores having a breach over the holidays. What is the latest you're finding out? Or talk about the HealthCare.gov security if you can.
We've had 2 hearings, Jim, by our committee that I chaired, and the hearings were about the subject of whether the ObamaCare website, HealthCare.gov, is secure or not. Each witness of our 8 witnesses testified basically it was not secure. This is the greatest assembly of private information ever gathered by the federal government. 7 different agencies are involved, including Social Security, including IRS. So you're getting some really personal information here.
And if I recall correctly, you had these experts whose profession is to hack for corporate entities to secure their own sites. You had the top of the top.
We did.
They're telling you what the situation was.
They're called white hat hackers now. They used to be black hat hackers, I guess, but whatever it was, these are the guys that were hacking into the companies in the United States, and they were going to be charged with crimes by the government, and they said, we'll help you, we'll help you if you don't put us in jail.
A new cottage industry.
And the White House hacker was at the witness table and said, I could hack into the website right now with my laptop, but it would be a crime, so I can't do it. But let me tell you, it's easy. But the most damaging testimony we heard was the government saying, we don't know whether the website has been hacked or not. We don't even have the capability of knowing yet whether we've been hacked or not. That's got to scare the American people. So I hope they can get their act together, but the American people's most private information, health and financial information, is not secure as we sit here right now.
And related to that frightening point of view right there, talk about the Obamacare website signups. Was announced over 3 million the other day.
Yeah.
What are conservatives in Congress looking at right now for tactically not being able to accomplish anything, and you may not be wanting to slow it down? What is the feeling in Congress about this whole implementation?
Well, it's interesting to us that the implementation, the rollout, has been so bad that we've had the president try to change the law. In fact, through executive order, has changed the law maybe a half a different times. Anything that was particularly burdensome or onerous, he's put off for a year, and businesses don't have to sign up if they don't have a certain number of employees. So they know it's not working well, and in fact, it's collapsing. We don't know what's going to happen, but right now, most of the American people are having to pay more for less. Their deductibles are going up, say from $350 to $1,000. They're paying for health care coverage that they don't need and don't want. So I still think there's going to be a popular revolt against Obamacare. And if Republicans take control of the Senate in less than a year, then we'll be in a position to actually pass legislation to repeal it or change it or defund it and make sure that it's going to work for the American people and not, like I say, make them pay more for less. We need to get away from that.
You mentioned executive orders there. I want to ask you, I also noticed you mentioned the Senate going Republican will not take the bait and get into the politics for respect of your time. But executive orders, it's something the president mentioned in his recent State of the Union. I think it was a week or so ago, the most newsworthy executive order being to allow refugees with minor ties, whatever that means, you can maybe tell us, to terrorist organizations into the United States. Talk about executive orders and that particular terrorist one, if you will.
Our president has been issuing executive orders that are broader, more expansive than any other president. Now, he hasn't issued as many, but the executive orders he has issued has undermined immigration laws, health care laws, marriage laws, drug laws, you name it, to a degree that is totally unprecedented. That is what is so worrisome. It's like he can create laws himself. He doesn't need a Congress, and this is not a dictatorship. This is not a totalitarian government. We still have 3 branches of government required by the Constitution, and that's for the balance of power. And last week, the president decided to try to change a current immigration law. Our current immigration law says you cannot admit refugees, people who are from foreign countries who are in fear of persecution. You don't admit individuals and allow them in the United States if they have ties to terrorist organizations.
Okay.
Everybody understands why. The president suddenly said, well, if they only have minor ties, we're going to admit them. There are 3,000 people in that category that he now wants to admit.
Determined by who? Do we know?
No, that's just it. You don't have any third parties to determine whether those are minor ties or not. You're going to, the individual themselves, we're not going to be able to investigate, so you're going to leave it up to the individual themselves to say, oh, I only have minor ties, not major ties to terrorist organization. Huge loophole, and I think a lot of these 3,000 people might well be a danger to Americans, and I'm just sorry the president took it upon himself to change that immigration law. I thought it was a good law, and we should not be undermining it.
Does an issue like that, and we'll leave it at this in respect for your time, Congressman, you've just spent a week on president recess. You've been traveling every one of your counties. You said during that time, is that one of the issues that's come up, or what are the top issues, 2 or 3, that you've heard about in the last week?
Top issues are still, I think, Obamacare. People are not happy with the way that is going. You know, I had a single woman come up to me 2 or 3 days ago and say her premium had tripled, and she's being forced to pay for pediatric dental care. Now, bear in mind, she's not married, she doesn't have children, but now she has to pay for health insurance for children and their dental care. It makes no sense, and it's across the board and that kind of thing. So she's upset. Talked to a lot of people upset about Obamacare, they're still upset about the deficit, about not getting our fiscal house in order, and a lot of people are still upset about various aspects of immigration, including the president's last executive order, which is a threat to American security and American lives. So I think we have, frankly, an administration out of control, issuing regulations that shouldn't be, EPA being an example, undermining laws that they shouldn't undermine, immigration being an example, and Where does it stop? We're going to continue with our investigations, but ultimately, you know where it stops? It stops on Election Day at the ballot box.
Well, speaking of stopping, we're going to let it stop right there with Congressman Lamar Smith, Chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Congressman, we really appreciate you coming in. Folks, be sure and tune in for future editions of Texas Insider TV, brought to you by Speedstream.
You're either an insider or you're not.
Congressman Smith, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
I'm Jim Cardle. Thanks.
He was cueing me in.
Oh, no.